Unfortunately, I think the move these days is to go away from ploughing. And a lot of farms are going to what they call minimum till, which they don't plough. They just cultivate the ground and put the seed straight in.
Well, I was going to ask you about that next. I was going to say, I know that environmental groups are suggesting that you direct drill, isn't it, it's called? And that's because they argue, at least in my understanding, that soil holds a large amount of carbon. And if you plough it, that exposes it to the oxygen, which then releases carbon dioxide. And the other reason is erosion, because if you plough, you leave it bare, which means that the wind can erode it faster. And something like there's going to be the soil's not going to be worthwhile or worth growing stuff on in about 60 years, they say, without doing it. So what do you think that's realistic to not actually drill? I mean, apparently it must work at least once or twice, given that people do it. But do you think it's long term that would work? I mean, there's obviously a reason why people plowed in the past, because it killed the weeds and because it made drilling easier and so on. Is it realistic for the future to actually change over to a place where we don't plough at all, or don't till it even?
I personally still think you should plough. If you go out into your garden and try to grow some carrots without cultivating, the carrots have a job to go down through the soil, and you get bent roots. But the thing is, one of the aims of ploughing is to get rid of the rubbish. So if you don't plough, you've got to remove the rubbish.
Well, if it's things like root crops, I mean, that would obviously mean you'd have to loosen the soil or do it in sand. But if it's like wheat, for example, apart from the stuff that when you actually put the seed in the ground, when it could be quite hard, and the roots need to get established, that doesn't necessarily cause that much of a problem, does it? Unless you do have the weeds, as you were saying, which then means you can't. It overcrowds them, and you end up getting a lot more weed within your crop. But is that a massive problem? Is that a problem that these minimum till farms are now facing, or not?
Weeds will use the nutrients needed by the crop. You've got to get rid of that competition. There's ways of doing it. You go out with your spray can. If you spray, you've got to kill the rubbish one way or another. Because if you don't grow rubbish, you're a liar. Everyone has rubbish. It's got to be disposed of. And good ploughing will get rid of the bulk of it. You'll still get weeds, but you won't get as many. So what they're doing is they go out with a spray and kill the rubbish. Now, that's not necessarily a good policy. You've got to control them and use sensibly. It's okay. But if you're using it all the time, we could have a build-up of chemicals in the soil. There again, you see, if you're not disturbing the soil, it's going to be very concentrated in the top layer. But because the weeds will come up, they're there and they will come up. And if they start competing with the plant early on, when it first comes through the ground, it's going to stunt your growth right from the start. And you want a good growth to get a good crop. It's doable, but is it right to be putting so much chemical on? I'm not saying you shouldn't put any, but whether it's right to put too much on and reliant on it. I mean, there's one particular chemical which is been used for quite a long time now, which is being very likely it's going to be removed. They are starting to ban it now, and that was one that was the most effective and the cheapest. But I mean,
that was Roundup, wasn't it?
Yeah, glyphosate. Yes, Roundup. Yeah.
And that's because they say, isn't it that case in America where they said it causes lung cancer?
Someone always seems to find a reason for everything.
Yes, that's the official reason for banning it, isn't it?
Well, we used to have one called paraquat or gramoxone. We used to use years ago, or diquat, and we used to use that as a total killer. That was deadly poisonous, and unfortunately, my brother, a chap in his class, was on a farm and he fell out with his girlfriend and he took a cupful, and there was nothing they could do for him.
Yeah,
there's no antidote for it. And I mean, I'm going back now in the late 60s, but the one they're using today is allegedly a lot safer. It isn't so potent as that. I mean, and of course these days the stores are thoroughly locked, so the wrong people can't get in.
Yeah.
But it is a problem. But you've got to, one way or another, you've got to get rid of the weeds. There is another way of doing it, we'll call weed combs, which is like a big rake, spring-loaded rake that people are taking across fields to rake out the weeds, because the weeds hopefully will be shallow rooted, and because you've direct drilled, the roots of the plant will be lower down, so they'll hold in. And some of the years ago, I don't know if they still do it, some of the organic boys, before they, because they weren't using weed killers, they were going with flame guns across the field and burning everything off before they planted. So all the plants on the surface were burnt off and died. But it's one of those things. I still think there's a place for the plough.
So it's more, in your opinion, it's sort of not entirely, but if we're to feed the amount of people we need to feed, it's a choice between ploughing and remaining organic, or using chemicals and direct drilling. And those two, it's not impossible to get outside of that, but it's hard to imagine a time outside of that.
We have a problem in this country that there's too much land going into houses. So year on year, our growing area is shrinking, and the number of people is growing. And also, there's, as you're aware, there's a big plan afoot to grow a lot more trees. Again, that's taking out land out of production. And so we've got to try and find ways of increasing yield. Otherwise, we're relying on imports and all the time.
And